Hi, this is Masaki from Kaida.com. Many of you know me from my work with pyramids and energy tools. And today we have a very special guest, Lada Ray. And Lada Ray is the creator of quantum calibrations, Earthshift, and multidimensional universe systems. She's authored many thousands of articles, podcasts. She has multiple websites. And I've found her work very interesting. She has a lot of knowledge about the Slavic and Russia sphere. And I want to really welcome Lada to the show. So welcome, Lada.
Hello, everyone. Hello, Masaki.
You know, in our world today, there's so much information, but one thing that I really love about Lada's material is it spans the esoteric, the metaphysical, but then also the more you might say normal geopolitical, political, economic type issues. But Lada, tell us a little bit about yourself and your work, because I find it highly interesting. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, as far as my elevator speech bio goes, I was born, as you pointed out, in Russia. And I spent my childhood in Odessa, which is currently Ukraine. Well, I'm not going to go into that, but hoping not for too long. And my first profession was linguistics, and I was very successful at it. I traveled all over the world. When I moved to the West, I worked as a financial consultant with Smith Barney, which was part of Citigroup at the time. And also very successfully, but then I discovered what really went on behind the scenes, and I left because I was, let's just say, disgusted and wanted my soul to stay intact. I didn't want my soul to disintegrate and become a part of this system, which was so terrible in so many ways. I spoke about it in many articles previously, and you all know what's going on Wall Street. So I left, and instead I became a master of certain esoteric sciences, such as feng shui. I studied in Asia, became internationally certified, also loved doing what I was doing, but I realized that I needed to do a lot more. And all my life I was actually predicting things, and usually they, with astounding accuracy, they came true. I also did a lot of geopolitical stuff, but off the books, so to speak. And so at one point, and there was, first I thought I would write novels in which I would predict things and say certain things and also alert people to certain trends and futuristic events, which incidentally is also one of my fortes, which is multidimensional futurism, which I do, which is part of my predictive system, quantum calibrations, and of course the Earthshift system, which is the mainstay system of everything that I created. And so basically I started doing that, but novels were very slow in that regard. I wrote 3 novels, 2 novelettes, and people seem to like, at least the Earthshifter made a splash. Gold Train, which both are partially about Russia, in big part, in fact, about Russia and predictive and foretelling certain events. But I felt it was not enough. So when events in Ukraine started happening, I just, went head first into geopolitics. My blog Futures Trendcast became very popular practically overnight. And I was publishing articles practically almost daily exposing what the US was doing in Ukraine, not just the US, EU as well, what was behind the events. And then I started talking about the entire world, and the rest is history. Basically, together with that, I began perfecting and polishing up my theories, which is the Earthshift theory, and Russia, the Great Balancer theory, which is part of the Earthshift, and then multidimensional universe, which was also part of everything, and of course quantum calibrations. And my latest book is Geopolitical and Geo-economic Quantum Calibrations. So that book is the latest. It just came out February, March, and right now, well, it became number one new release in prophecies. So did pretty well for a while. So I hope more people look into it. It's sold on Amazon, Kobo, which is Walmart as well, and Apple and Barnes and Nobles, etc.
I probably started catching on to your work around the time that you started going more public with your work on Ukraine. And I don't know what it was because I didn't have much awareness or much interest in the Russia sphere, but there was something about that time around 2014 when the Maidan coup in Kiev and Ukraine. I think that somehow woke a lot of people up, even people not directly tied to Russia sphere, and it's very interesting. And anybody that is interested in Lada Rare work, Google some of her material, and you'll start finding out that the Slavic Russia sphere, or the Rus, is highly significant to basically everything on the planet. Besides being such a large region encompassing the steppes of Eurasia, but there's so many things that come with that. But Lada, one of the things that I'm really impressed with, or I find that it matches my sensibility, is that you use a lot of the feng shui system, but you also span the esoteric, the metaphysical, along with the more mundane or regular 3D world. So you're sort of I don't know how you say, the sacred and profane. You bridge what a lot of people are talking about now with like New Age or quantum holographic universe, but a lot of these people do not have the rooted knowledge from who is from the banking world, but also a quantum calibrator. Well, Lada Ray is, right? So could you talk a little bit about how feng shui or calibration can play into really getting a good assessment or accurate assessment of where we are in the world today?
Well, first of all, as far as New Age, I actually do not consider myself a part of New Age, although I respect a lot of practices there. And actually, probably a lot of these New Age esoteric practices, that's what woke me up. And that was a long time ago. That was 1999, year 2000, thereabouts. But ever since, it developed way past that. And I believe what, in many cases, is somehow lumped with New Age are actually ancient practices, such as shamanism. How old is shamanism and how old is New Age? Or how old is feng shui, incidentally? And feng shui is probably thousands of years old, as in its wholeness, although many practices were developed in the past few hundred years.
Well, I just mentioned New Age because that's a lot of the talk today. There's sort of like a new wave of 1960s type consciousness among the young people. But you, just like myself, we have our own family traditions. My family is a Buddhist priest for 400 plus years, which comes out of the Vedic tradition, which connects to Rus people in Russia. But one thing that I noticed, so I'm not saying you're a New Ager, but it's like you overlap with what's kind of what is being talked about today, but it's even more because you span more topics and techniques and so forth. But one thing that I find interesting about calibration, which we also use in energy work, the kind of energies that I work with pyramids and tensor rings and energy tools and so forth, there's no meter off the shelf today that you can buy really to get an accurate assessment. But it may surprise people, but basically using very similar techniques of calibration with pendulum and so forth, you can get the energy levels, the esoteric energy levels of things, just like you get the the soul calibration and the consciousness calibration of people, of countries, and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this is very important because there is a popular sentiment among people in the West today, and the West is also the modern culture that influences the whole world, that you can't know anything. If you have an opinion about something,
Mm-hmm.
if you try to assess things in any way, there's this sort of like a SJW or social justice warrior sentiment that everything there's the goalpost can be moved. You cannot get your hands and say this is a concrete fact. But in fact, people that do calibrations and work with these energies and do the kind of trend casting that you do, it's very informative.
Yeah.
That these calibration systems. So tell us about your quantum calibrations, because it's such a big part of what you do.
Yes, you're absolutely correct. Everything you said is just terrific. Basically, calibrations is not pendulum. If people should have a concept of what we're talking about. It is a lot more scientific. It is a lot more hands-on than pendulum. Although pendulum is, I respect pendulum in all ways of calibrating something. But quantum calibrations is a specific discipline. It is based on David Hawkins' system, which he developed in the 1990s. David Hawkins, MD, PhD. His book, Power versus Force, is what actually woke me up a lot and changed my life significantly when I first laid my hands on it and that was the very beginning, in the year 2000, 2001, thereabouts. And so calibrations of human consciousness is a scale. It's like from 0, which is death, to 1,000, which is complete enlightenment. And what we do when we calibrate, we use kinesiology, which is known to many people. Usually people know it or remember it somehow as a tool for assessing your health. But this is such a tiny, teeny part of what kinesiology can do. Kinesiology is, simply put, a muscle test. But when I started working with calibrations of human consciousness, it was, as I said, the beginning of 2000s. And so at first I was just working within the framework of David Hawkins. Then I discovered that calibrations can do so much more. And little by little, I started developing my own set of calibrations, my own system, which eventually became known as quantum calibrations. And as I said, the new book, Geopolitical and Geo-economic Quantum Calibrations, assessing 94 countries, 10 organizations, 7 major business and corporate worlds, etc., tons of stuff in there. Please go and check it out on Amazon or stores, online, that is. And what my system does, it is a complete new system based, of course, on the foundation of David Hawkins' Calibrations of Human Consciousness. So when we do that, we apply basically our upper chakras. Heart chakra plays a huge role in that, and your personal calibrations should be very high if you are a calibrator, because otherwise they will not come out accurately. Heart chakra calibration should be high, very consistent, as a matter of fact. So it is a big, also the upper chakras, third eye, and seventh and eighth chakras are very important in this. So all the upper chakras, which are responsible for the higher functioning of the system, which is the soul and spirit, okay, all of them are playing a role here. So when we do calibrate, even though this is a muscle test, it's calibrated either with an arm or with a hand or fingers. I mean, there are many ways of doing that. I use this system very extensively and with my consultations and my private consultations. Private clients come to me, and they usually need advice, they need predictions, they need psychic advice, they also need coaching. And in addition to that, of course, I use all of my talents, including even knowledge of the financial markets and geopolitical knowledge and relocation around the world knowledge and psychology and health, etc. But they all come so that I would calibrate certain things for them. And calibrations could be past, present, and future. I can do predictory calibrations. I can do historic calibrations. And of course, I can calibrate present. And so there are so many values that I've developed, which is the quantum calibration is the general calibration of a subject or object. And there is chi, which is manifestation. Then there are many, many other calibrations. I'm not going to go very deeply into that unless it comes up later. But what is important to understand is that this system of knowledge, as you correctly pointed out, is extremely important in assessing things, in understanding things. It provides so much deeper, such a deeper layer than anybody can, if somebody is thinking psychically about something, you can say things. Well, this is what I'm seeing, for example, but you cannot truly assess where that, whatever you just saw psychically, how it compares to something else, for example. But with calibrations, you can correctly, with a number, like, for example, something calibrates at 500, that means love. Something else calibrates at 310, which means that willingness and cooperation. There are values assigned to each of the levels of calibrations. So when you're saying that you cannot say it is not correct according to Western principles or US principles to have your opinion or compare something or assess something or pass judgment. And judgment is for some reason considered a negative thing. Judgment is, I have news for you guys, judgment is something that in our 3D world, which is transitioning currently into lower 4D world, which is internet and the World Wide Web. In our world, judgment is not only an absolute necessity, it is the only way to actually live and survive. You pass judgment on everything every single day. It is very positive. It is a very necessary tool to pass judgment. You judge, should I have coffee or tea this morning? Should I eat this extra piece of toast, or am I going to gain weight after that? Should I take my car to work, or should I take a bus, etc., etc.? Should I tell my friend about this or that? You do this every single waking second of your life. That's how we live in 3D. If we lived in some other dimension, higher dimension, of course that would be different. But point is, in our world, the swear world, judgment or thinking too much or this or that, this became swear words in the American and Western reality. These are not swear words elsewhere.
Well, Lada, one thing that not many people may know about me is I used to work in trend casting for music and fashion in LA, and I used to go to like the Magic trade show, which is a big fashion trade show in Las Vegas. And some of the people that I work with now are doing sort of like coverage, trend casting related to so-called sustainability, but it's not the sustainability in a holistic sense. It's tied into this whole UN agenda and the bigger corporate agendas of that are being fed to the public. And I think I just wanted to bring that up because you're talking about being able to assess, being able to see where we are, where things are. Well, I'm telling you, Lada, that there's many people that for a living as their career do trend casting in different fields here in LA.
Yes.
And they have totally lost it. They do not know what's going on.
I'll tell you more. They are guessing. They're guessing. Okay, whatever they do trend casting wise, sure, some people may have intuition that helps them with this. And other people, they just use formulas, whatever they were taught, or whatever is trendy. Oh, the trend is going in this direction. Then it will continue going in this direction. And then in 2035, we will get this, and this. I've seen this happen in financial industry. But I will tell you something. Do you want to know a big secret why they're bombing at this right now? Why it used to work better and now it doesn't? Do you want to know the big secret? Okay, the secret, very simply, it is the earth shift. That's what it is. In one of the things it's a very deep discussion in itself, but you know because you listen to my webinars, right? My earth shift webinars, they each takes a separate side of the events. Incidentally, the Earthshift webinars can be purchased on lada.com website, my main portal, and it takes one area of life, and it just discusses it. It predicts. I work around my theories and such. So one of the webinars, number 4, is Earthshift webinar number 4. It's period date predictions. So when it was time of the West, that's what this webinar basically discusses. And that was the most of the second half of the 20th century. It was period 6 and period 7, what I call period 6 and period 7. And during those periods, the West was in favor everywhere. This is why the West, and especially the US and UK was also second after that, developed so well. And so everything was going in that direction. So it's easy to predict a trend when the trend is basically stable. For 40 years. I'm actually was a little bit longer than that. It started just after the World War II, and then it just went and went and went. And this period ended in the beginning of 2000s. And now remember what happened in the beginning of 2000s? There was a minor crash in the stock market. That was about 2000, 2001. So everything that was going up so nicely, it actually sort of went down, and after that it was pretty wobbly for some years. But what happened in 2001, 9/11, okay, that was a signal that there will be a switch. Whether it was inside job and who did it, we're leaving this outside the scope of this, but point is that was a signal, that was an omen that times were changing, that there was a change. Then of course the wars, and we got into period 8. And this period, which is the current running period, is the time of Russia. But these periods, they change energy so that everybody sort of around the world gets their chance one way or the other. So this is the time of Russia, a completely different spread. And it is the earth shift. So while my periods are basically this system of periods, it's like 20 years, and there is a switch, there is a different period, different energy. That's one thing. But the earth shift is something that is going to take over 100 years to basically develop and really switch. It's taking some of the energy that is ill-gotten power that the West, and especially US, possesses now, takes it out. And so the great balancer, Russia, rebalances the world gradually outside of the influence and sphere of the West, and rebalances it towards other, distributes it around the world. And it's still not very equal, but it is going in that direction. Well, and China, of course, is taking a chunk of this power right now, but that's also a separate, very big story. Basically, what happens is that they cannot predict anymore because the trend is broken. The long-standing trend is broken. The earth shift sees to it, and they're confused. They don't know how to do it.
I think a major difference between, say, the past trend casting in the West and now is, before, or say like newscasters. Before, they knew if they're saying something, they knew it's BS, right? They're putting propaganda. Mm-hmm. But now everything's so in flux and change that, take the whole Mueller report and Trump and the whole saga of Trump since he was elected, right? Is they've actually bought their own BS, and they are really lost because, like you're saying, everything is changing now. And in the feng shui system, you could say the West or US is very young. It's overly young, or maybe in astrology you could say Aries. There's unyielding. They do not know how to adapt, and they're actually doubling down, becoming more rigid at the time they should be more adaptable.
Well, I call it inverted collapse, as you know. That's also the one of the webinars in my webinar system. So it's webinar 2, inverted collapse. So the reason it's inverted collapse is that what the USSR was years ago, when USSR lost its way, forgot what they were about and all this, when things were not working, when they were very defensive about the West. They felt like they were doing a catch up. That's how the West, US and Europe primarily, now feels in the world. They have to play catch up to China, to Russia in so many ways. And I describe it constantly. And as you well know, my Patreon site, I write a lot of articles there. My main stuff currently is written on Lada Patreon. And we discuss it all the time there. It's like one of our ongoing big discussions, what is happening and why it's happening. Basically, everything is transitioning. This inverted collapse is working on many, many levels. And we are seeing it in everyday world, in this, what used to be trend casting. Now they're consistently wrong. They cannot get anything straight. Look what's happening in Washington and how they're operating. They're making mistake after mistake. And every time, it seems like they can't get anything right. Okay? Whatever they're doing, everything seems like, I remember this time. See, for me, this is a big deja vu because I caught some of the, not really the collapse of the USSR, but pre-collapse time, the 80s. I was there. I remember I grew up during that time. I came, into myself, into my, adulthood, basically at that time. I remember very well what was really great living in the USSR, which I cannot find in the US all this time. But also what was terrible, they were really losing their way. Now this is happening in the West. I mean, they are confused. They don't know what is hitting them. And that's because they don't know my theories. If they understood their shift.
For people that are, the first time hearing Lada Ray, definitely check out her Patreon, the Lada Ray Patreon. And, in not recently, but maybe 10 plus years ago, I was subscribing to a lot of financial newsletters. And, what your tiers on the Patreon, so it's like $10, right? The amount of information that you put out, the value that Lada Ray has, it would be much more expensive back in the days if you're subscribing to a financial newsletter. But Lada's material, it spans the metaphysical, but then also more of the normal so-called geopolitical. But some of the things I think that if you're interested in relocation, if you're thinking about moving to another country, if you want to get a unique view on different countries, I think Lada's new book and some of her webinars also, you had calibrations on different countries. I myself have looked into various countries, and some of your readers, patrons, they can ask about specific topics. But if you look at the track record, you were talking about how in the feng shui system, different directions or different regions have a prosperity or qi flow, right? And you're saying the West had an extended flow, but that also means that, say, USA, UK, and Europe are basically back-to-back on the time scale. Their trends are back-to-back. So I find it very interesting because, I started following your work around 2014. It's like 5 years later, right? Well, now we can see the troubles they were having with the mass migration,
Right.
the social conflict, the inability of the governmental systems to handle the societal changes. It's happening here now, right?
Right.
And that completely follows your system, because we never had, in history, we've always had migrations into the U.S.
Yeah.
But never in history have we ever had 20,000, groups of 20,000 people coming from Central America
Trying to
up
cross
through
the
Mexico
border.
And so it's very, very similar to the so-called refugee migrant crisis in Europe.
Mm.
And I just wanted to say that because this is the value of the information that Lada has put out is it gives you I think even if some of the things may be uncomfortable, it's the truth,
Yeah.
which we call Vedism, right? The truth.
Yeah. Yes.
So
So
I think that it gives you maybe some sense of stability or comfort in being able to accurately assess your environment, what's happening on the planet.
yeah.
So then you could say, you know, of these three possible places I want
Yeah.
to relocate to, I'm feeling this one's good, and you check against a lot of calibrations, and I think it's very informative. You know?
Yes, yes, absolutely. It's that's one of the reasons I wrote the book. I wrote it hoping that perhaps if there are any smart politicians out there, smart even like managers and CEOs of companies, maybe they will also somehow read this book and maybe they will start doing something right. But mainly, I wrote it for simple people like you and me, like everybody who are my actually global audience. And my audience is truly, truly global, in which I love, absolutely love. So people tune in from everywhere, from Singapore and Russia to Australia and Latin America, and of course a lot in the US and in England and in Europe as well, quite a few in Europe, and we have some people from Africa as well, and all this is helping people, and a lot of people who are a part of my Patreon group, and this is a very advanced group, and I just love you guys all dearly, and you are, in fact, you understand things. You know, I am looking for more people who can understand or who want to understand things, who want to learn things. You know, so join Lada Patreon. You will find out a lot of great stuff there. But what I'm trying to say here is that this is great for practical purposes. The book is great. What I'm giving, all the information on Patreon is terrific for practical purposes. And I oftentimes also face these same questions, whether we have a new series which discusses once a month my predictions and what I feel will be happening in terms of investing and money. And I do not give any stock advice. This is on principle. I do not deal with that because, you know, I know there is a lot of crooked stuff going on there. But what I do give you is direction. I talk about money and I talk about certain investing that goes beyond that. It could be real estate, Bitcoin, of course, currencies, like some of the questions that people are asking, like what to expect for the US dollar, which is one of the upcoming episodes, what to expect for Bitcoin. And of course, that's always in people's minds. But that was my big prediction for that. Bitcoin, real estate, US dollar, various currency, all that was in my, again, webinar. That was webinar 3, The Future of Money. But we also, with this new series, we will be also talking about these things, like specific, like maybe currency. People are asking about yuan, how to invest in yuan, you know, and that is also coming up, you know, maybe whether ruble is something interesting. Incidentally, out of more or less major currencies, this is the most undervalued currency in the world currently. Out of any currencies that are viable and are worth even thinking about, this is the most undervalued currency in the world, Russian ruble. So hint, if anybody is interested in buying real estate in Russia, this is the time to do it. This is definitely the time to do it, because at this stage where ruble is so cheap, this will not continue forever. Meanwhile, yuan, just to give you an example of what may be discussed on Patreon, yuan is they permanently keep it down on the down low, basically. Yuan is undervalued as well, but it is a very highly managed currency. And there is a way to invest in yuan if you live in the US, for example. If you live in Europe, I'm sure there are opportunities as well. And so there will be another post in which I will describe what can be done. You have an advantage if you live in New York or LA. Incidentally, that's where you actually can invest in yuan if you live in those places. And I will discuss this as well. So there are many things that we can do. But as far as the book goes, it assesses the country. It accesses 94 countries and territories, plus organizations, etc. But the majority of countries, a large chunk of countries, are assessed not just via calibration, but there is an article that goes with each of them, sometimes very substantial article. And it is both geopolitical and predictive and down-to-earth, sort of practical. But calibrations, which incidentally I explain the whole book, is all about explaining what calibrations are, what they really do for you. An excerpt can be read on my website or on Amazon. And then I go into it's a whole battery of calibrations, which actually tell you where you stand, where the economy of a country stands, where sovereignty stands, where its solvency is, and not to mention the general calibration and general chi of the country, which is manifestation, plus the army and the leader of a country. And I can tell you this is a huge, humongous work I've done on this book, because there's nearly 1,000 calibrations overall in the book. And just doing one calibration for most people is unattainable, and making it accurate. Just imagine doing 1,000, almost 1,000 calibrations. I can tell you I needed the rest after that, a big rest.
You've talked a lot about Global South, and I can't remember if there's a specific webinar that encapsulated the Global South topic, but China, I've gone to Brazil many times over the past decade, and in Latin America and Africa, which is Global South, China is heavily invested and very active. Do you think that, feng shui being Chinese system, do you think that they're aware of this, or is it just like a natural trend, or both?
Well, as far as feng shui goes, if you're talking about the periods, which is in its essence, it's based on feng shui, of course. So the periods, when we switch to period 9, which will be in several years, and to find out, you can purchase webinar 4, or you can become a part of my Patreon site where we discuss it and I predict things all the time. But also it's in the book. In the book is discussed when period 9 starts. So once the energy switches to period 9, this becomes the time, ready for this, of the global south, which means that that's what's going to be prominent. That's what's going to be developing faster than any other region of the world. And what is global south? Actually, believe it or not, Masaki, this is a set term, of course, which you use and I use. But believe it or not, I actually had some indignant comments. How dare you say global south? Is denigrating to certain countries.
Well, south of the equator, I don't know what else you call it.
Well, global south is a geopolitical term coined in the West. I cannot tell you exactly who coined it. It's either British or American coined term, which of course has a certain amount of, it is a 20th century term, is a geopolitical term. It is not a geographic term. And what it meant when it was coined is basically third world countries. All third world countries, by some strange coincidence, oh my God, not a coincidence, okay, esoterically and geopolitically not a coincidence that all the third world countries basically are located in the south compared to developed countries. Well, that was the logic of the 19th, 20th century. These are all developing countries. These are all third world countries. That's what collectively became known as Global South. And China also was part of that Global South, but not anymore. Okay, so countries that have developed really fast, they certainly stopped being part of the Global South. So we still use this term. And any country that has not gotten its time in the sun yet properly is still called Global South. But China already is not a part of that Global South. But anything that, whether it's Latin America, it's Africa, it's large parts of Southeast Asia, essentially, these are usually the Middle East. It actually can also be lumped with Global South. But what will happen in period 9 is that everything changes. Again, the energy changes. Different countries will start developing faster. And I know my people who are, say, I have some wonderful people from South Africa, from Nigeria. Well, they love hearing that. From Latin America, as a matter of fact. So there will be a lot of changes there. And what China does, they understand it, but not necessarily from the feng shui perspective, because this is a very, very little known theory. But what they do understand is the fact that they need to invest and they need to stake out certain countries while they can. They have to expand because their potential is enormous, and it worries some people, but that's already a very different story. Maybe one day we'll do a podcast about China and discuss the problems and the goods and bads of China, let's just say. But what they're doing, they are penetrating into markets. They're staking out those markets. As the West is leaving, notice that the West is leaving. The West is unable anymore. US, and if we're talking Africa, that's mostly EU and a little bit of the US. And US wants to continue keeping Latin America under its thumb. But China has such excess of free money that they don't know what to do with. They have to go anywhere they can. And there is a lot more resistance to them in Asia because they're neighbors who are close.
Just like Vietnam, I had a friend that was in, I think, Da Nang. It's like in the middle of Vietnam, I believe. But he said, prime real estate, perfect beaches, and it's a lot of Chinese condo developments, and then the history, like you're saying, just because of the historical history of Vietnam and China, there's some friction there. But I'll say this though, Chinese, even though there are reports from Africa that there's because it is a big movement of Chinese influence money going into Africa, but I think one difference between Chinese and traditional imperialistic West, Chinese very practical. So they come in, maybe they're going to get some metal ores or farmland or whatever, but they say here's the money, but they don't impose the ideological maybe Christianity or some imperialistic structure like the Western tradition.
They're very businesslike, and there is more difference there. It's very interesting too. They're very businesslike. They do not exactly right. They do not impose anything ideological. But what they also do that the West never did for those countries, they build stuff. They build roads. Well, the USSR did the same thing. They would, if they went into some country like Afghanistan, in Afghanistan, Afghanis to this day, they remember Russians fondly, believe it or not. So it's all a lie that Afghanistan was fighting against Russia. It was the US together with Taliban and Al-Qaeda that were fighting against Russians and Soviets there. But they left roads, they left schools there. They left a lot of stuff that is that they are remembered fondly for. And what did the Americans do when they go into Afghanistan? They destroyed everything and they looted. And Iraq, that's another. They looted everything out of museums. Then they claimed that somebody else looted it. Okay, now it's sitting in private collections somewhere in New York or in London or in Caymans or whatever. They're hiding it in vaults. Whatever they stole from Iraq and Afghanistan, all their treasures, historic and such. Anyway, so what Chinese do in Africa, they build stuff. And all this infrastructure, basically they need infrastructure, but they also build it, is like ports maybe built. Oh, the recent very interesting developments in Europe. So Europe is now so desperate, they're ready to work with China. You know, traditionally they went along with the US narrative, which was, oh, China is so bad, China is aggressor, China is imperialistic and all that. But now they're in dire straits, and they're very happy to work with China in whichever way possible. So China bought very quietly some ports, one port in Greece, which they turned around. That port was bankrupt in Greece, absolutely bankrupt. So the Greek government sold it to China. They turned it around completely, and now it has become a huge hub, rivaling, actually takes business away from other major ports in Europe. Now they're doing the same in Italy now, and there is more. So they, the new Silk Road. This is a 100-year project basically for China, and so there are several routes for the new Silk Road, and one of them is slanted to go through Italy. Italy, of course, is in a very bad financial situation, not as bad as Greece perhaps, but still very bad. And Europe alone, EU, cannot deal with this anymore. So they're basically even happy to give some of the burden to China. China can come in with investments, and it's not much of an investing at this point in Italy. But if the new Silk Road goes through Italy, which is what they're promising because of the ports, that will be humongous absolutely huge for Italy. And the reason they're doing it, or rather it's like a meeting of the minds there, is that the government in Italy is really wants to work with China. Meanwhile, they also Chinese president went to France and signed a deal for Airbus, I believe 300 Airbuses, which is like a humongous order. Basically, yes, it's quite a few billions, like 6 billion or something like that. It's a very large order because, what's happening at Boeing. Boeing is like, it has problems, it catches fire. Recently one caught fire in Russia. Then Boeing constantly has malfunctions. So Boeing is out of favor. Nobody wants to buy Boeing. Of course, US is livid that business that used to be theirs is like really slipping away little by little.
I'm a Mac guy. Like, I've used Apple products for decades.
Mm-hmm.
I'm looking at Huawei devices now because the price point and what they offer is better. I think that, in this world, we just need balance. And for, whatever people think about China and so forth, the West has had such dominance. And now, things are switching up. So that's one of the reasons why it's good to look into some of the material that Lada has. And one of the things I wanted to bring up, because it is one of the big parts of your material, is the Great Balancer. We know that in the feng shui system, you have yin and yang. You have the more masculine and the more feminine. But then I never heard of the Great Balancer. So tell us a little bit about some of the basics of feng shui and then how the Great Balancer plays in.
Well, the Great Balancer is not a part of feng shui at all. This is my own creation, my own invention. Nobody ever used. But it is based on the basics of Chinese and Eastern worldview, which is actually a Vedic worldview, as you correctly pointed out. We're not going to go, this is like a separate discussion, which is very fascinating, what Vedism really is. And as I said, I have a series of webinars. It's called Forbidden History and Forgotten Origins webinars. Also, you can find them on ladare.com. And in that series, I prove exhaustively that Verism is not an Hindu term, although of course it is currently used as Hindu term, but in reality it's a long story, but it comes from what was in the olden day Rus. And that is a very, very long story. But yin yang, which is very well known in Rus Verism, is a con. It's like a circle. It's a full circle, and then it's divided. You know how yin yang is depicted. Usually, the circle with dark and the white sides. And each has a dot, which is the opposite of the other. So we have to have a little bit of each. And ideally, this con means, again, this is Russian term, a Rus term, rather, Vedic term. It is that circle. It is completeness, in other words. Okay, this word con, C-O-N or K-O-N, really, in English as in the words like conical, for example. Okay, so it went through a lot of perturbations, and then it became words like this, conical. It's a conical shape, for example, right? So because we live in such a polarized 3D world, yin and yang, they're kind of split apart, and oftentimes they fight. So the West is excessively yang or yang, right? And East used to be excessively yin. But now East is changing. See, what is happening? The West is becoming more yin, and the East is becoming more yang, which is rebalancing the world. Here's your great rebalancing right there. And who is responsible for this? The only country in the world that is fully yin-yang. This is Russia. And incidentally, as I also prove in my Forbidden History webinars and in other places, in my whole theory, it's also on ladaray.com, incidentally, there is some free information there. Incidentally, this is why Russia is the only country that possesses such large territory with relatively small population. It's one of the most, if not the most, underpopulated countries in the world. I don't know, maybe Canada and Australia can rival the underpopulatedness of Russia per square mile or square meter. So Russia has such a long, extended territory, and it spans both large chunk. The largest piece of Europe is Russia. And a very large piece of Asia is also Russia. The reason it has both is because it has to have part of the West, which is yang, and part of the East, which is yin. And therefore, we have yin-yang right there, with the split going by the Ural Mountains. Ural Mountains, which is the dividing point between Europe and Asia. Geographically speaking, that's historic geographic point. However, Eurasia, of course, is the whole continent. It is artificial division on Europe and Asia, which was developed because of these supremacy movements and theories of the West. That only developed in the past several hundred years. Before that, it did not exist. So, because the world is in fighting 3D mode where yin and yang fight. So what Russia does, it's Russia's karmic and job, is the destiny, it's historic destiny of Russia, is to be the great balancer, which of course is the worst position to be, because any problems, any sort of fighting in the world reflects immediately on Russia. You know, I had another interview some time ago, and somebody commented in comments that, well, for the great balance of Russia really is imbalanced. That's why, because the world is imbalanced, has been imbalanced for the longest time. And how it is imbalanced, what this is about, is all this fighting. And everybody wants to invade Russia. You know, only blind and deaf do not know about Russian history, where so many forces but primarily from the West in the past 1,000+ years, to invade Russia. Of course, there was the Genghis Khan, which incidentally I'm dispelling in in the Forbidden History webinars, Genghis Khan supposedly also invaded Russia. It was completely different. It is part of that Forbidden History and Forgotten Origins. It was something very different. But from the West, there are constant invasions. And the reason, and then revolutions in Russia, and that's exactly why. The world is very imbalanced. The world is very incongruent. The world is very fighting all the time. So it immediately involves the great balancer. Immediately, the great balancer has to step in, and at the huge cost to us, to Russians, to the population of whether it was Russian Empire or the Soviet Union or current day Russian Federation, huge cost. We have to step in and just break the pattern and rebalance the world. Look at World War II as one example. One of the examples. Okay, look at Syria today, for example. Look at Venezuela, incidentally. That's another one. I mean, I can give a million examples. So basically, what is great about this time in Russia, it is again, a long story. It's all described in my webinars again. There is webinar 6, The Putin Enigma, where I described all of this stuff very thoroughly. What is great is that Putin has changed the trend. He came in at a very challenging time, and that's his destiny. Basically, Russia gave birth to this leader who can maintain peace, who knows how to manipulate these shark-infested waters, how to navigate, rather, shark-infested by the West waters, and balance everything and rebalance everything. And meanwhile, without sacrificing the population's interests and standard of living that much. Of course, sanctions are bad, but it's day and night how Russians live today and how they lived historically, because Russia always gave, and never received anything back. So he learned to balance. So Putin himself is also the great balancer. And actually, my whole work is about that, about balance and harmony, etc. So all this, in fact, yeah. And one more thing about the great balancer, that's actually very interesting, that some people may find very curious and very telling as well. Some might say, okay, so why really is it yin-yang? How do you determine it's yin-yang? I already said one criteria, you understand, half of it, or a big part of it, is located in Europe. Another chunk, large part, is part of Asia. It's Siberia and the Far East. But look at this also. Russia can lean. That's the only country that can do that successfully. Russia can lean when something needs to be repaired. Like major, like say World War II happened, right? And a big chunk of Russia was destroyed by German Nazis and Romanian invaders, let's just say, together with them. Primarily those two forces, but there were also Finns who participated in that. And that's okay. And so because of that, Russia can lean to repair Yang side, which is European side, can lean on the East, which is Yin side, and fix it up. Or if Yin side needs to be fixed up, it can lean on its Yang side. So that's how it rebalances and very quickly restores itself. That's the only country in the whole world that can do it that quickly and that expediently, because it is yin-yang.
Many people have talked about the Russia sphere, or Russia would be leading a new trend. Many people like Edgar Cayce and so forth. So I think it really fits in with your work. And so we just have a minute or two left. So can you tell us about current things that people should know about, or anything that's upcoming, Lada?
Oh, a lot is upcoming. We have, if we're talking Patreon, the new, as I said, there is money and investing segment that I will be doing at least once a month, maybe twice a month. We have ongoing, always happens at least once a week. I post something that is geopolitical. So we will have a post, will Assange be extradited to the US? we also have Forbidden History, New Forbidden History and Linguistics series, and the next one will be, I don't know if you read it, but Masaki, but the previous post was about the forgotten ancient capital of Rus, called Stara Lada or Old Lada. And the next one, not that I'm touting my horn or anything, well, since my name is Lada after all, right? But of course, that was the name of the goddess of harmony, incidentally, and smooth sailing and everything else that is nice out there, and family as well. But the next post will be about Greece and why Greece is really called Lada. And I wonder if you can guess why. No, that's a question for another time, I'm sure. Many other things are coming up. We are doing multidimensional healing and activation program. That's for advanced tiers in my Patreon system. And of course, visit my blog, Futures Trendcast. There is a lot of free stuff going on there. All the time I post something. And my YouTube channel, so Lada Ray on YouTube. You can just type Lada Ray on YouTube, it will come up. I might be renaming it to Lada Ray Earthshift, possibly. But for now, it's Lada Ray. And some podcasts are coming up. New podcasts, we will be discussing Lada Ray Minority Report. That's one podcast. And there will be a podcast where I will focus specifically on what on earth are quantum calibrations. Then, and there will be lots more. It will be ongoing. Some of you know us, and I might want to discuss various things, and I'm sure Masaki will join us as well for our discussions. So we intend to invite you to co-host our podcast in the future. Lots of things. So you can find me on Futures Trendcast. I'm sure links will be posted underneath this video, right, Masaki? And you can find me on Twitter. There's Facebook also, which I advise people of what new stuff is coming up. But primarily it's ladaray.com. Also my author site, which is more complicated. It's ladaray.weebly.com. And there you can find excerpt, very extensive excerpt from my new book, and buy links. And of course, visit me on YouTube as well. Okay, so thank you so much. That was such a great interview. Loved it.
Well, thanks a lot. 1 hour. It's, we try to pack him as much as we can, but you can always check out Lada Ray on her sites and her Patreon. And we'll catch you next time. So thanks, Lada.
Thank you. Bye.